the story of happening there. Why did the Mecca in Hijaz become important? Why did Hira in Hijaz become important at all? And I think the reason is because, as I said, history is written by the victors, and the victors in this case were the Abbasids. They basically controlled the show. They controlled Islam for hundreds of years after they took control in the 8th century. In the mid-8th century, they took control. And they were obviously politically powerful before they took control, because nobody comes out of nowhere with no support and manages to establish themselves so strongly as Abbasids did without having huge numbers of supporters. So they clearly had huge numbers of supporters beforehand. And we don't know exactly how long they had the supporters beforehand, but they did have huge numbers of supporters. And then when the Abbasids came in and took control of things in the mid-8th century, that's the 750s, the narrative was gradually filtered through Abbasid eyes. And we don't even know what the Umayyads said or had to say about this matter, because everything they have was abolished by the Abbasids. We have no Umayyad sources except perhaps the Jutangshu, and maybe Tabari is reiterating something which was known from Umayyad sources, but somehow he slips under the Abbasid radar. He gets underneath the radar there, and he allows us to see a little bit, a peek into the past. But otherwise, the whole thing is controlled by the Abbasids. And I believe the Abbasids had their origin in Hijaz. They are the Quraysh people. They therefore wanted to take control of the entire narrative and make it look like an entirely Qurayshi narrative, which was based around their ancestral shrine in the Hijaz. So they made this ancestral shrine into the Mecca, and they made the whole story about that and all about the Qurayshi tribe, because they themselves were Qurayshi. And that was the center of their cult. Their ancestral shrine was there. And so that was very easy to make the story about Hijaz based on the fact that the Abbasids were the Qurayshi people from Hijaz, and they wanted to basically big up their own ancestral shrine and homeland. So the Abbasids related everybody in the story, in Islamic narrative, to themselves, to the Qurayshi tribe, even though in reality none of these people had any relative or relationship to the Qurayshi tribe. But in order to take control of the narrative, the Abbasids made everybody into Qurayshi. Muhammad became Qurayshi, Ali became Qurayshi, everybody was Qurayshi, Omar was Qurayshi, everybody became Qurayshi because the Abbasids were Qurayshi, and they fabricated the history for all these lineages that they don't exist. Now, if there was a patrilineal descendant of Muhammad alive today, if Muhammad had a son who had a son who had a son who had a son who had progeny right up until the modern day, then they would know the origin of their tribe. They would know who their ancestor was, but they don't exist. No such men exist. There are no such men in the world today. And in fact, the Abbasids made it that he didn't have any male offspring at all in their narrative, even though there is a disagreement with that in other parts of the narrative. He didn't have any offspring. Nobody descends from Muhammad except his daughter, one daughter, who married Ali, they say. And that was very convenient for them, because then they could fabricate the history of Muhammad. If Muhammad, the person we're calling Muhammad, had any ancestry records at all, they would have all been abolished by the Abbasids. If he had any sons, they would have been abolished by the Abbasids and killed, executed as well, hunted down and tracked down to make sure that there was no challenge to the Abbasid narrative. Muhammad was a Qurayshi. He appeared in Hijaz. He was part of the Abbasid narrative, the Abbasid world. So that's pretty easy to explain how everything becomes Qurayshi and everything becomes Hijaz, just because the Abbasids said so. And if you disagreed, you would be pretty quickly eliminated, along with the entire family. That's an easy thing to do in a dictatorship. Very easy to track you down. Eventually, you'd be terrified to talk about it, and you would keep it quiet. You wouldn't tell anybody. So the real story was about Ali, as the Shia says. It was all about him, and Muhammad actually was just somebody who's supporting and there to help Ali until Ali is old enough to really take control of the show. This story, corroborated in Jutangshu and by Tabari, is the story of Hani ibn Qabisa and, if you like, his prime minister, the one who is ruling the world for him until he comes along, ruling the show until he comes along, is Hanzala. So the real Ali is Hani ibn Qabisa, and the real Muhammad is Hanzala, his prime minister. That's what Tabari tells us. And this story of how this Ali, Hani ibn Qabisa, takes control of the empire from the previous ruler, the Lakhmid king, is corroborated between Tabari and the Chinese source, the Jutangshu. Those two together, take them together, and you've got the story of how it happens. The last Lakhmid king leaves his armory and his position of rulership and his constitution or instructions on how to be king to this young man, who then, he's Hani ibn Qabisa, who then is sort of guided on the path by Hanzala until he comes of age, until he's old enough to take control. That's the fundamental story. Anything else you want to hear about what Ali did and his life, you can take it from the hadiths as you like. That's fine. Anything else you want to hear about what Muhammad did in his life, you can take from the hadiths. That's fine. Just as long as you know it happened in Hira in South Iraq, not in Hira in Hijaz. Okay. If you should also know that it was the Abbasids who made it into Hira in Hijaz rather than Hira in South Iraq, and it was the Abbasids who made it into a Qurayshi phenomenon rather than a more complex Arabic phenomenon. The language which we're talking about for these people in South Iraq is Judeo-Arabic. It's the Arabic of the Jews of that area. The religion that we're talking about is actually Noahide Judaism, specifically Messianic Noahide Judaism, as promoted by this channel. It's the religion we promote in this channel. It's the original religion behind Christianity, and it's the original religion behind Islam. Noahide Judaism is also the original religion behind Judaism as we understand it today, and many other religions too, perhaps even with elements in Hinduism and Persian religion too. So that's why you'll find some corroboration sometimes between Islamic sources and Zoroastrian sources or even Hindu sources, because we're talking about the Noahide Judaism, which was the origin of all of these religions, which is the fundamental common ground between all of these things. All right. So the language, as I said, is a Judeo-Arabic dialect. Now, the Abbasids have a serious problem here because their dialect is Qurayshi Arabic. And the Quran simply is not written in Qurayshi Arabic. No matter how much they try to say it is in the narrative, the simple fact of the matter is when you study the Quranic language, you realize this is not plain, simple Arabic according to the Qurayshi dialect. This is why Gabriel Reynolds is so important in this, because you will see that there's a ton of Aramaic, Syriac, Hebrew, and other words inside of this dialect used in the Quran. This is not standard Qurayshi Arabic. What it is, very simply, is standard, plain and simple Judeo-Arabic, or Arabi, Lisan Arabi Mubin, intelligible Arabic language. That's what it means, intelligible Arabic language. Intelligible for who? Intelligible for Judeo-Christian community. A Judeo-Christian community using lots of Semitic terms from Babylonian Aramaic and Palestinian Syriac and Greek terms, Greek Christian terms, and Hebrew and various other terms in their dialect, will find the language of the Quran nice and clear and easy and intelligible to understand. But if you don't have that milieu, if you don't have that mixture of exposures, if you're not exposed to the Jerusalem Talmud's Syriac, the Babylonian Talmud's Aramaic, if you're not exposed to the New Testament Koine Greek, if you're not exposed to the Old Testament Hebrew, if you're not exposed to all these different languages and concepts, you're not going to understand everything which is written in the Quran, because it is written in this language, this Judeo-Arabic language. And so if you are from that group of people, then it will be Lisan Arabi Mubin, which is intelligible Arabic language. However, if you're a Qurayshi, it's not going to be very intelligible. It's not going to be very easy to understand at all. And that's why there is so much work, so much effort, so many grammars, so much academic effort dedicated to trying to explain the Quran inside of the Qurayshi dialect and all the obscure, weird rules that they invent to try and make the Quran make sense in Qurayshi Arabic. The reason is because it is not Qurayshi Arabic. Plain and simple, it's not Qurayshi Arabic. That's why they've dedicated so much effort to try and make it make sense in Qurayshi, because it's not. But if it is Judeo-Arabic, it's plain and simple and easy to read. And by the way, its meaning is extremely different from certain things that you've been told. For example, one of the phrases it uses in the Quran is, it says that Inna yakun lahu walid. Inna yakun lahu walid. Indeed, he has a son. Indeed, Allah has a son. It says this in the Quran. But in Qurayshi Arabic, when you say Inna yakun lahu walid, which means indeed, certainly, verily, because, therefore, he has a son, in Qurayshi Arabic, it means the exact opposite. It means he doesn't have a son. Why? Well, because the grammarian rule books of Qurayshi interpretation on the Quran say that that means the opposite of what it literally says. There is no other reason why we translate that verse as God does not have a son, except that because the Qurayshi grammars tell us that that's what it means. There's no other reason that we translate it like that. Only because the Qurayshi grammars tell us that. In plain, simple understanding of modern Arabic language, every dialect of Arabic in the world today, it still means he has a son. But it means that he doesn't have a son. Why? Because that's what the imams tell us. That's what it actually means. That's what this particular phrase means in this particular case. So you wouldn't be aware of that unless you were an Arabic speaker. And if you hadn't studied the Quranic interpretation of this verse. If you had only studied translations, you'd think the Quran is saying that God does not have a son. But that's not what it says. What it says is that he has a son. Indeed, he has a son, but that God does not adopt. He has no need to adopt a child. Itachida, he doesn't adopt a child. And it uses this phrase, he doesn't adopt, he doesn't adopt, he doesn't adopt, many, many times. And then it uses this other phrase, Inna yakun lahu walid. Indeed, he has a son. In other times, not as many times as it says he does not adopt a son. So he doesn't adopt a son, but he does have a son. He has a son, but he does not adopt a son. He has no need to adopt a son because everything belongs to him. Indeed, he has a son, and this is to be nothing unusual to you. Anything is possible for him. He can do whatever he wants, and he has a son. He didn't adopt him. His son just is. That's what the Quran is saying in Judeo-Arabic. But in the Qurayshi dialect, even though those words mean literally, he doesn't adopt a son, he has a son, the Qurayshi dialect has decided to change the meaning of that to mean something else. And I think this is really more of a doctrinal issue and a matter of interpretation, tafsir, rather than is of linguistic matter, because I have yet to meet an Arab who does not agree that inna yakun lahu walid literally means indeed he has a son. But they all know that even though that's what it literally means, it's not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be taken as glorify him beyond the fact that he has a son, for example. But even though it doesn't actually say that. Subhanahu inna yakun lahu walid. It actually means glorify him, indeed he has a son. So, well, yeah, it literally says glorify him, God be praised because he has a son. But it doesn't mean that because the Qurayshi interpretations are different. So Gabriel Reynolds is really important in understanding that the Arabic of the Quran is simply not Qurayshi. It's a mixed dialect with Aramaic, Syriac, and different types of words in there. That's really important. So he plays a major role in this. That will make sense because the Qurayshi dialect is tied to Hijaz, but the story of Islam, Islam's corroborated history, is tied to Hira in South Iraq. So we should expect it to be in a different dialect rather than Qurayshi. Okay.